All for joining us today. For those of you watching at work or at home, we are devoting this hour to talk about dads, the definition of a modern dad, the dad who wishes he was more but doesn't quite know how, the partners they support, and the HR directors who love them. We want to talk about how dads can accomplish their goals of being more engaged and more fulfilled at work and at home, and at how their companies can make this happen. I'm Bugbee, the Senior Managing Editor at Care.com, the world's largest online community for families and caregivers, as well as a workplace benefit helping to ease the burden of pet care, housekeeping, childcare, senior care, and tutoring for employees and their families around the world. With me, I have Brad Harrington, Executive Director of the Boston College Center for Work and Family, which recently published its 6th edition of the New Dad series, a renowned exploration of the changing roles of fathers at work and at home. Simon Isaacs, who co-founded the website Fatherly in April 2015 for dads, after realizing that parenting content wasn't just for moms. Scott Behson, Professor of Management at Fairleigh Dickinson University and author of The Working Dad Survival Guide, How to Succeed at Work and at Home. He runs the popular blog Fathers, Work and Family, dedicated to helping working fathers and encouraging more supportive workplaces. And Nathan Potter, VP of Engineering at Chartbeat, a company known for helping websites monetize their engagement and a very generous time-off policy. Welcome to my panelists. So, I want to talk about the state. Oh, and that's me. I want to talk about the state of modern dads. Simon, let's kick it off with you. Dads are suddenly getting a lot of attention for being parents. You even started a website geared towards them. And as we examine the modern dad, why do you think this buzz on fatherhood is so hot right now? And would a website like yours or a book like Scott's have gotten so much attention 10 years ago?
Thanks, Katie, and welcome everyone. You know, it's a really good question, and dads are certainly hot right now, and I mean that in every way. You know, and it's true. We are certainly at peak fatherhood, if you could chart it out. You know, and we started fatherly.com as a parenting site that focuses on dads. Everything out there has historically been focused on mom. It's pink, purple, and turquoise. This is a real stat. There are actually 4.2 million mom vlogs, and there wasn't anything out there for dads, and that may have been okay for years, but certainly doesn't reflect the interest and demand and the sort of the shifting that we're seeing in the American life and at home. And so, you know, Katie, part of it is, you know, we have the rise of women in the workforce, right? They're actually, if you look downstream, they're the majority bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs. It's really exciting, and we still have, of course, a long ways to go. So that has contributed to all of this. And at the same time, sort of counterpoint or counterweight, or as part of that, we see the rise of dad, meaning men really interested and engaged like never before in decision-making and caretaking. Overall, we're seeing more kids than ever before growing up in dual-income households. If you're, for example, some Pew research came out, if you're making $75,000 or more household income, 75% of those families are working in dual-income households. So what we're seeing first and foremost is parents sharing responsibilities. Both of them are working, and they are trying to figure this out before we're a far cry from the one-earner household model, primarily the man going to work and the wife staying at home, or the spouse staying at home, I should say. On top of all of this, you know, we have the rise of millennial parenting, which may scare half the population, but you know, 80% of new births are to millennials, and this is a generation with really different beliefs around shared responsibility. Again, what that amounts to is people wanting to take an active role and men wanting to take a more active role than ever before. And then layer on top of all of this, this is also a new generation who has a very different perspective on and interest in work-life balance or work-life integration, however you want to put it. So I think that all of these factors are sort of creating a perfect storm to sort of why fatherhood matters today in the workforce. I don't think it certainly wasn't like that 10 years ago. You know, and as an example, you know, if you are a consumer brand, 10 years ago, most brands were operating under the idea that, you know, 80% of all purchases were controlled by women. And that was sort of an operating belief for every CPG company. Well, last year, you know, men claim overall that that about 52% of them were the primary grocery shopper. When you look at millennial dads, 80% of millennial dads say that they're the primary grocery shopper. These are really vastly new trends. I think in general we're seeing, you know, families, mothers and fathers, or fathers and fathers, or mothers and mothers, sort of navigating this new space for the first time. And you're also seeing employers and brands and all of us navigating this space. And so, you know, I think we're in a really critical time, but certainly this is very new for all of us.
So that's interesting because you're talking about all the priorities that men are putting on themselves now. And Brad, the Boston College Center of Work and Family has documented these major shifts in dad priorities. The Shriver report, which you highlight, states that 3 in 5 men today name personal achievement at home as a marker of success. What is this, because they're wanting to be the equal partner? Is it because their wives or their partners are going back to work? Is it and working and succeeding and they're having their children later or is it because they're wanting to do better than their own father was? And so we're seeing these generations always trying to strive to be more involved than the one before. What are you attributing to this shift of the definition of success?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think first of all, you don't have to be today's male you just have to have studied psychology and human behavior and identity and things like that to realize that success in long-term meaningful relationships is always going to weigh much more heavily in your view of having a happy and fulfilled life than success in the workplace. That's not news. Or it's not new news, I should say. I think when you look at the markers of people who feel they have a happy and successful life, and the most recent data I saw on this was from the Pew Center, and I think 60% of people or 55% of people said, you know, success in my career is meaningful. 75 to 80% said success in my marriage is going to be the most meaningful, and like 99% said, you know, being a success as a parent was going to be the most meaningful marker. So, I mean, all of those are important to people. Obviously, all of them were weighted at more than, you know, by more than 50% of the people as an important contributor to their sense of a fulfilling and happy life. But we've known for a long time that parenting and meaningful personal relationships generally outweigh success in the workplace in terms of people's long-term happiness and sense of fulfillment. I think as far as what's driving the change for men right now, I think it's both a want and a need. And I think the slide that you just moved away from showed that men today, according to the Families and Work Institute, feel a greater level of work-family conflict than their spouses, and those were young men in dual career situations. And I think that speaks to maybe the need part of it, in the sense that young men today are married to spouses. Simon, you know, already gave you some good statistics, but the spouses that these young men are married to have at least as good, if not better, career prospects, better education, better results in higher education than their male counterpart does. And so I think that men know that there is a need there, given what their wife brings to the relationship, and from a career standpoint and an educational standpoint, there's a need there for them to step up and not assume that their wife is going to accommodate their careers, but they may have to accommodate their wives. And I think from a want perspective, I think, you know, it's one of those things that the more you do, the more you like it. And I think we've seen, if not always in the U.S., certainly in other parts of the world, where men who get involved in hands-on caregiving early on in the child's life tend to feel that that's something that they want to continue to be an important part of their life going forward. So I think that the old stereotype that men define their life success based on being a financial provider does not gel with what we're finding when we survey today's fathers. You've got a slide up right now where we ask fathers to rate and then later to rank order what were the most important things in terms of what they believe to be the most important determinants of being a good dad, and being a financial provider came out fourth behind things like provide love and emotional support, be involved and active in their children's lives, and be a good role model, teacher, and coach. So I think that it's that general realization of how important long-term relationships are, as well as the specific needs and wants of men today in terms of being more active and hands-on and caregiving than the past generations were.
That's interesting. So Scott, as someone who is kind of studying the evolution of this, where do you think it's going? I mean, as women are maybe getting more involved and invested in their own careers, and more possibly more dual income houses, if that's growing, do you think that how will the millennials be as fathers, and how will the generation behind them be as fathers?
Right. Well, right now, there are millions of dads out there who care very much about success at work and success in their careers, and are also putting in a lot of the time and the energy to be really hands-on, involved dads. And we hadn't talked about this for such a long time. And you asked the question before of Simon of, are we having this conversation 10 years ago? We should have been having this conversation 10 years ago, but we weren't. But we are now, and it's really accelerating. I think, and millennials and millennial parents, or even millennials before they become parents, I see as a college professor and as somebody who studies this area that the millennial generation is much more has a lot more foresight into this area of their lives than perhaps prior generations. Many of us of my generation and above, we chose our careers in college or right after college, when we were single, before we were married with kids. And a lot of us kind of just get stuck on this track without really thinking about it. But there's a lot of indications that millennials are really thinking about how their careers fit the rest of their lives, even before they become parents, even before they get married. They're really trying to think in a more forward-looking way about, well, yes, I want career success, but I don't want it at the expense of the rest of my life, or of not having a full or well-balanced life. And in fact, there was this one study I was looking at the other day that millennials' #1 hesitation for aspiring to leadership positions in organizations is the effect it would have on their future family life. And I just think that that's a real good indication that millennial parents, or millennials even before they become parents, are thinking about this issue more so than prior generations. But it's always been true that dads, I think we tend to speak ill, I think, of prior generations of fathers. Of course, many fathers, most fathers, cared about success at work and being involved in their family lives. Maybe there weren't the same expectations, but I think there was always the intentionality there. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes about this ever, and I quote this in my book, The Working Dad Survival Guide, from Michael Lewis, who said, dads today are in kind of this dark age where we don't know what the expectations are about being a good dad. Prior generations, things weren't perfect, but at least you knew what a good dad looked like. And he thought that future generations, which is now the millennial generation, will have a much better idea about successful fatherhood and balancing it all. But for those in Gen X, there's kind of a changing set of expectations, which makes it, a difficult time for many dads who are navigating this for the first time, maybe without role models and parents who have done this themselves. So I think it's great that there's Fatherly out there and Boston College's studies and a book like mine to provide at least some context, some advice, and some encouragement for dads who are facing the challenges of work and family life.
You raised some really interesting points that I'm hoping to get to throughout this piece, especially the dream that we start out as parents, right? Like, this is how involved I'm going to be, and this is the type of mom I'm going to be, this type of dad I'm going to be, and then the work hits, and how to keep each other on task. And I really want to talk about that when we talk about parent equality, as well as kind of talking about moms have been trying to figure out the perfect balance forever. And are dads going to actually crack the code here? I mean, or are you all going to embrace the dad guilt and mom guilt that we've been having and struggling with and blogging about forever? And so I really want to tackle that too. But for right now, let's talk about the workplace and the roles dads are taking at home and how work is affected. Because, you know, as either these millennials are starting out on their career and raising their families, or the dad today who wants to be everything. You know, Brad, in your research, you highlight that fathers today see their responsibilities as both providers and caregivers, as you mentioned, and are spending more time not only on child care but housework than past generations. Probably not even seeing their fathers change diapers, and then they are embracing this. How does spending more time on parenting, household responsibilities impact the careers of these modern dads? And is there going to be, and have you seen, the dad tax like there has been on moms?
The dad tax, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think one of the things we probably need to keep in mind is as we sort of talk about fathers, we might want to think about a sort of a traditional gendered idea about what fathers are that might be somewhat, you know, dated these days, versus this idealized sense of the father being, you know, running home and putting on the apron and starting to cook meals and, you know, and sharing everything 50-50 with the wife. And I would just say we're not probably, for the most part, if you sort of try to generalize, we're not in either of those places right now. I think we're at a transition point. So what you see, and I'll just give you two frequently cited stats from our studies, which kind of make the point that I do think we're at a transition point and we're not quite to this utopian ideal of 50-50 parenting. The first one is, and I often cite this, we asked fathers in a study we did, which we called Caring, Committed, and Conflicted, which I think probably summarizes best what we think fathers are these days. How do you think caregiving should be divided between you and your spouse? And about 68% of the fathers said it should be divided 50-50, and I should share equally in caregiving responsibilities with my spouse. When we asked how is caregiving divided between you and your spouse, 30% of the guys said 50-50, and 70% said my wife does more than I do. So what you see there is a real distance between their aspiration to be an equal, you know, caregiver and the reality of what they're doing today. And I've seen other surveys that put those two data points a little bit closer, but there still is always this distance between what fathers hope to be doing and what they are doing. The other stat that talks really specifically about their role in the workplace and how parenting influences them was that one of the questions we asked fathers, and these were about 1,000 fathers in in 4 very large Fortune like 100 companies. We asked, would you like to spend more or less or the same amount of time with your kids than you do at present? 77% of the fathers said, I want to spend more time than I do at present. 22% said the same, and 1% said less. And we always speculate that 1% might be the last honest men on earth, or they have parents and teenagers. But so 77% of the guys, more than 3/4, said, I want to spend more time with my kids than I do now. Later on in the survey around the careers, we said to the dads, would you aspire to a job with greater responsibility than the one you presently have? 76%, so 1% less, but 76% said, yes, I want a job with greater responsibility. 58%, or almost 3 out of 5, said, I want a job in senior management with my company. And these are companies with revenues ranging from $20 to $70 billion a year. So when you think about that, you know, what you've got is, you know, if you want to state it cynically, you've got men talking out of both sides of their mouth a little bit. But I think what you really have is men who are in that transition point where they definitely want to spend more time and be more engaged in parenting. They want to share that parenting responsibility more equally with their wife, and I know they feel the pressure to do so, and maybe the desire to do so. But they're also in a situation and in work contexts where real men, put in the hours. Real men are always the ideal workers who are available to take on projects, to travel at a moment's notice, and that kind of thing. So I really do think this idea of, we're between the old traditional view and this new utopian view. We're not at a point where we've reached this utopian ideal of gender equality in the home or in the workplace yet.
Interesting. Conflicted sounds like the right word. So because we're talking about the workplace too, you know, and what the workplace can do to help. You know, Nathan, I'd love to talk about your experience on this topic. And one of the things we've heard of the perks of Chartbeat is the unlimited vacation or paid time off policy. Is that the key to this conflict that dads are facing? You know, and how can modern dads take advantage of this kind of flexibility to improve their work-life integration?
Yeah, sure. So we do. I would say we don't call it unlimited vacation. I mean, the policy as it's stated is that we tell people to take what they need, and that can be for a variety of reasons. Certainly, a good portion of it is, you know, parents taking time off to fulfill various parental responsibilities. And that's only really one of the things that we do to try and create a workplace that's sort of as friendly for parents and dads and moms as possible. You know, the interesting thing about the vacation policy is that what we find is that, you know, the amount of vacation that people take varies quite a bit. And it's more of an issue for us to get people to actually take the vacation than to not take it. I mean, we get people that, you know, especially parents that are feeling guilty about taking time off to spend with their kids. And I, on numerous occasions, have had conversations with my employees and say, look, don't feel bad about it. Take the time off. This is a really important part of what you're doing and being productive here at Chartbeat. So taking that time is a sort of big push that we do to get everybody across the board, you know, feeling good about working here. The other key aspect to what we're doing to create that kind of environment is giving people flexible time. So not just saying take time off, but you know, take 8 hours a day to do your work, spend a few hours at home, spend some of it at the office. You know, do what you need to do to fulfill those responsibilities throughout the day. Because often it's not about, you know, taking a day off or a week off to spend time with your family. It's about, you know, going to the parent-teacher conference, going to this performance or that performance. And I think, you know, as you know, schools and education and responsibilities of raising kids, the demands for parental involvement have gone up considerably over that time. So just giving people that flexible time really makes a difference. And it's important to not just allow them to have it, but it's important to allow people to actually use it. So what that means is creating infrastructure where people actually can do their work when they're not in the office. You know, I mean, the simplest thing is allowing people to get their email, but realistically, you need a lot more than that to do your job. So one of the things we do here, for instance, is that for all of our engineers, we have a development environment where an engineer can pick up their laptop, go home, and do their work, and it's exactly as if they were sitting in their office in terms of what they have access to, how they can access it, speed of their access, and what they're actually working on. There's no difference between sitting in the office or sitting in their home office, assuming they're not working on a modem or something like that. But as long as you've got a broadband connection, it works pretty much the same way. And I just want to say that we're not just doing this because, you know, we feel like it's the right thing to do, although we absolutely do feel it. Just to allude to what Scott was saying, this is kind of an expectation for people in the workplace these days, especially the millennials that we're hiring here at Chartbeat. And being able to give them that kind of flexibility is a huge recruiting tool. I mean, we definitely have people that take jobs at Chartbeat in a very competitive tech market here in New York, you know, because we give people that flexibility to work from home, to take the time they need to spend with their families.
So, I mean, you raised a really interesting point about people, you know, having all this paid vacation time and people not really taking it. And I think we know that about paternity leave too. You know, a lot of companies have paternity leaves that are offered, and yet men are afraid to take them. And so it seems like an obvious answer that HR needs to enforce it. But what can we do? I mean, and so as we kind of talk about paternity leave, which can be the elephant in the room, it's, you know, well documented that the United States doesn't have a national paid leave policy for new moms or dads. And Brad, what is the private sector landscape look like as far as paternity leave goes? And I also want to talk about, and Scott, I think we'll focus on you there, but like what can HR companies do and men, dads, do to make sure they take advantage of it and that it's enforced and used? So first we'll start with Brad.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're seeing a changing and improved landscape for paternity leave, and corporations and to a lesser degree states and municipalities are sort of the ones that are sort of taking the leadership position. So you have states like Rhode Island, California, New Jersey, that have implemented paid leave for parents. You've got cities that have done that in Seattle, Chicago, San Francisco, and so forth, and most recently Boston, that are trying to enforce these kinds of paid leave policies for all employees. And companies are starting to make real strides there as well. A couple of examples that are from work that we do with organizations. I think the most well kind of documented in the media kind of leave policies have been those of the kind of Silicon Valley darlings, the Facebooks and the Googles and so forth, who are giving 12, 14 weeks or whatever. And some organizations just sit there and think, how in the world can they do that? And so I think that's seen as great that they're doing it and very progressive, but a lot of organizations may see that as a bridge too far. But in our study, we worked with EY, who offers fairly generous policies and much more typical, I would say. So what they do is they offer 2 weeks of paid leave for the dad, and then if the father designates himself as a primary caregiver, whether it's a dad or a mom, that person gets an additional 6 weeks of paid time off. So if a dad is the primary caregiver, that means they get 2 weeks plus 6, so they get a total of 8 weeks of fully paid leave policy. The primary thing is a little problematic. I mean, the good news is it's not dictating it by gender. It's dictating it by who's the primary caregiver. The problem, of course, is most people are striving more to be shared caregivers than having one partner be primary. So, but that said, this kind of takes gender out of the equation a little bit and gives dads the opportunity to do more. And then more recently, and just a couple of months ago, Johnson & Johnson, who's one of our premier members at the center, has gone to adding an additional 8 weeks of paid leave for both moms and dads. And so they decided to increase paid leave. They decided to make it equal for mothers and fathers, which was terrific. And the other thing Johnson & Johnson did, which reflected very strongly what we found in our paternity leave study, was they said that the leave that the fathers got, for example, could be taken anywhere up to I believe the first year of the child's life. And that's one thing that came across loud and clear is dads don't necessarily want to take their 1, 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks of paid leave right after the baby's born. A lot of times they want to take that leave later, perhaps when their wife is starting to get back into the workplace, or when she's back to the workplace altogether. That might be the time when they want to take advantage of taking paid time off. And we know that dads flying solo and having opportunity to care for their kids individually, not as a helper to their wife, is a really good way for fathers to really build their competence and confidence as a caregiver. So we're seeing the landscape changing pretty quickly. And it's very encouraging to see the fact that organizations are stepping up not only on paid maternity leave, which, as you said, we lag the world in that issue, but also paid paternity leave as well.
Right, and following up on that, somewhere around 14% of private employers are offering paid paternity leave. But like Brad, I see a lot of progress in this area. And I think what happens is in competitive industries, you mentioned EY. So EY has a generous policy. So they compete with 3 other big accounting firms for the same talent. So guess what? Their competitors are going to have very similar policies and put them in place. And so we kind of see one industry kind of tipping and then another industry kind of tipping, particularly in these competitive environments, kind of war for talent environments. Where we'll see real progress is when smaller companies or more blue-collar or employers of more hourly employees really catch on. But I just wanted to add to the private sector landscape there that Brad was talking about. In terms of taking paternity leave, because you suggested that many men don't feel comfortable or supported in taking paternity leave even when it is offered. And that's definitely the case in many organizations. I sometimes say it's in many workplaces it's not safe for someone to out themselves as an involved parent, and and that really can hurt working men in particular, because not only are men who are seen as accommodating themselves to family or accommodating their career to family, not only are they seen as not kind of with the work first work culture or the all-in organizational culture, they're also violating traditional gender norms, which some in upper leadership might still be kind of holding on to. So men, you have to think about it. It could be brave in many organizations for someone to step up and take an extended paternity leave when it's offered. However, I really think that the workplaces are changing, and many companies just haven't thought about paternity leave, and that if you went to your supervisor or if you went to your human resource manager, you could probably start raising this issue. And one of the good things about paternity leave is you kind of know in advance that you're going to have to take it, so you can maybe work out some arrangements or get your organization to really think about this. So that's one thing that's important. Another thing that's important is the issue goes beyond just paternity leave, and it also goes into what Nathan was talking about as working flexibly or visibly altering your schedule for family time. And one of the things I really try to do in the Working Dad Survival Guide is give dads some advice on how they can navigate the workplace, what opportunities might be there for them, what obstacles can be in their way, and how they can advocate for themselves in the workplace. But that's what the dad can do. Obviously, I know we have HR managers and supervisors in on this webinar, and I would really encourage organizations to really think about what's best long-term for your company. Grinding your employees down and not giving them time off and chronically overworking them, or holding on to that talent for years and years and years because you're going to be accommodating when people need it for their family lives. So there's lots of ways we could do that. Nathan, gives an example of an organization that has given a lot of thought and attention to that, and we need to see more of that. In terms of, Brad raised an issue about when and how dads can take paternity leave. I think another model that might make sense is 1 or 2 weeks right away, and then 1 or 2 days a week staggered over the next few months. And in this way, dads might feel more comfortable in taking this type of paternity leave because they're not completely taken away from the workplace. They're not out of sight, out of mind. They're still connected to work, but they still have the time for care and bonding and transitioning to parenthood. And then finally, I think what we really need is for dads who have job security and a track record of really good performance to stand up and be counted. And I have a friend of mine who works for IBM, and they have just recently offered a 6-week paid paternity leave program, which is great. And he's taking it. His wife is 6 months pregnant. He's already stated to his bosses and to everybody at work that he's taking it, and he's taking it in the most visible way possible. He's talking to every person he knows in the work, every manager he knows, every dad he works with, and he also has a blog, so he's going to be chronicling this. And he's doing it publicly because he really believes, and I think he's right, that the change is going to come when dads in great numbers use these policies and show that it's normal and it should be considered normal. And I think that's where progress is really going to happen, is when paternity leave isn't seen as, oh, that's just for Silicon Valley and these great employers or for super lucky dads, when it's for everybody. One last thing, the CEO of Tom's Shoes recently took a 12-week paternity leave. And he's the CEO. And of course he could do it because he's the CEO and who's going to fire him. But sometimes we have to get over ourselves. Sometimes we feel like if we take our full vacation time, or if we take an extended leave, everything's going to fall apart without us, or our career is going to get derailed. We have to get over ourselves sometimes. If the CEO of a company can take 12 weeks off and trust that this company will continue to run, then maybe we can delegate stuff to our team or to our coworkers and know that the company won't fall apart without us. Sometimes, as much as we can blame companies and corporate culture, we sometimes do it to ourselves too, and we have to give ourselves the freedom to take our full vacation time, or if there's quote, unlimited vacation time, or however Nathan mentioned it, we have to give ourselves the opportunity to take that 1 or 2 days to play golf or skiing or go on the family vacation, knowing that we can do it as long as we continue to be valuable employees. We're going to be able to do that. So sometimes, dads, we do it to ourselves.
That's really interesting. And I really want to jump to Simon, because you talked about trailblazing. And Simon, you talked and wrote about figuring out paternity leave within your own company at Fatherly. Why was it important to you to figure out a way to make it work, and what did you end up doing?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I think you're referring on Father's Day. I came out with this piece in the New York Times about sort of what does paternity leave look like in the age of the modern job. And we at Fatherly had done this big document, and thanks to Scott and actually Brad's team has recently published as well, this 50 best places to work for new dads. And it chronicled a lot of what Scott and Brad have been talking about. So if you want to hire top talent, you have to provide these sorts of benefits today. And that's why Facebook and Google and Bank of America are all doing it, because it's a comparative advantage. And that's all well and good. But as we look ahead, the majority of the workforce isn't going to be working in companies like a Facebook or a Google. 40% of the workforce is going to be independent workers. So what does paternity leave look like for the Uber driver, or for the entrepreneur, or for the small business person? And the reality is it's very hard. We launched our latest platform on Fatherly the same week that my 4-month-old daughter was born. And so I gave myself a B- in my Times piece for my leave. And I tried to be as active as I as active as I could. Go ahead.
A D? A D minus?
B minus.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was in a public forum. Maybe I should ask my wife, and she may give a different grade. But I think the lesson that I've personally learned is how hard it is. If you are an HR manager, if you are an employer, or if you are an employee, it's very, very difficult. We are providing this leave even as a small business, as a startup, because like Chartbeat, like all the companies that we've talked about, one, it's a comparative advantage. If we want to hire all of this great talent like Nathan and talent like whether it's engineers or marketers, it's important that we do it. The other piece is we are creating a company that reflects our vision and values in the world, and first and foremost, that's the most important thing. So we want to live those values, and it's not about, we love our work, but we also love our children far more. So we want to make a workplace that's flexible enough for that. I think the last piece I would say here is this idea of culture. I think a lot of people here have talked about sort of this shifting space that we're in today, and that many dads still don't take the paternity leave that they're being offered, or other parental benefits. And so there is this sort of self-stigma that goes on. And I think that's really, with Fatherly, our biggest contribution here. If we can create really engaging content that enables guys to identify and celebrate themselves as fathers, enables them to show up and provides them the content for the first time in their hands, and able to navigate that new responsibility. Hopefully that enables new dads or young dads to be a little bit more active and willing to, to Scott's point, whether they're out there carrying the flag publicly or privately, do that. And I think the more that we can do that and celebrate fatherhood and celebrate the importance of it, the better. And the final thing I will say here is, if in addition to this idea of supporting dads and being competitive and living your values, if in your company you have a mandate or a focus to support women in the workplace, paternity leave is one of the things that you can also do. And it's been shown that supporting women, supporting dads and enabling them to take paternity leave is one thing that you can do to help level the playing field between men and women, and help continue to strengthen women's leadership. So, all of these things are important, and I would suggest if anybody has any questions around it, happy to be helpful.
That's great. Nathan, I imagine that Chartbeat has a pretty generous paternity leave. And it's interesting because, you know, you talked about flex time, and you talked about, you know, kind of how modern technology is enabling us to be able to do more. And I read the piece of the Tom's founder taking 12 weeks of paternity leave, and actually encouraging him to disconnect. He's a CEO, he's a founder, and he unplugged completely. And I feel like even flex time, it's like this double-edged sword, right? Like you are able to go to your kid's soccer game, but you're checking emails. So it's limiting parents, mothers, fathers, from being present. So I'd love to talk about paternity leave at Chartbeat and what is it, and how the culture supports maybe disconnecting and connecting at home.
Yeah, so we do have our paternity leave policy is pretty similar to the ones we've been talking about here. There's a 12-week primary caregiver policy and 6-week secondary caregiver that can be taken by either moms or dads. They can take it. A dad can either take it as a secondary at the same time, or after the mom goes back to work and take 12 weeks as a primary. You know, I think just to hit a couple of points, you know, we are definitely encouraging dads to do it. There's no question they don't take it at the same rate that moms do, but that option is out there. We have had some dads do it. And, you know, having it happen at the top and encouraging down through the organization, you know, is definitely a big part of what we're trying to do. You know, to get to your point about, you know, disconnecting that period, you know, again, this is one of those things where you need to lead by example, and, you know, scolding dads who come online, you know, when they're supposed to be on maternity leave and do that sort of thing. You know, I mean, sometimes, you know, that's what we need to do. It's hard to resist being connected when you're carrying your work around in your pocket all the time. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to touch briefly on what Simon was talking about, how it can be a challenge. These kind of policies can be a real challenge. I mean, you know, Chartbeat's about 100 people now. You know, when I started, we were about 12. And certainly, you know, the difference between taking paternity leave at a 12-person company is significant than the difference taking a 100-person company. And I don't know if there's any, you know, perfect solution for that. I mean, one of the things that we really try and do is, you know, create flexible roles so that there isn't a single person that's the only person that knows how to do a given thing, so that when they go on vacation, somebody or go on opportunity leave, somebody else can pick up that responsibility and carry it as they're going forward. And, you know, again, as Scott was saying, I think being able to plan for that is a big part of it. We're saying, okay, you know, I'm constantly asking, you know, the dads on my team who I know are going to be dads soon, well, what is your plan? Are you thinking about your plan? Are you talking to your team about how that's going to work? And, you know, we found that as long as the prep is there, and we know that, you know, we know months ahead of time what's going to happen, especially at the size that we're now, it's not so bad. You know, 100 isn't huge, but it's not tiny either. We found that it's enough to make a cushion that we can get through a paternity or maternity leave without too many problems.
Interesting. And so there's so much to talk about, and we have 10 minutes. And Brad, quickly, the providing work-family support at work, how are these programs impacting recruiting, retention, but also possibly budgets? And what are companies seeing as the effect? Is it more than just recruiting, or are they seeing more engaged people come back and want to be invested in the company that gave them this leave?
You know, I can't speak much about budget, to be honest with you, because I'm just not that sure. But, you know, going back to when we studied on-site childcare, you know, more than 15 years ago at Bristol-Myers Squibb, we saw what that kind of a benefit did for, you know, the employees from the standpoint of loyalty and commitment and desire to stay with the organization. I think you see less of those kinds of benefits and more things around short, you know, somewhat short leave policies for parents, or, you know, flexibility. And the value of, you know, flexibility to me is just one of those things that is such a no-brainer. It doesn't cost anybody anything to allow people to work flexibly. You know, maybe they have to have a laptop or you know, some kind of a digital device, whatever. But I mean, beyond that, there's virtually no expense involved in allowing people to work flexibly. And yet, when you look at the kinds of things people kind of cherish in terms of their work, flexibility is usually in the top 3 or 4 of almost everybody's list, and certainly is in the top of the list of most young people today. So I think that, you know, offering these kinds of things, we know that when we did our study of the 1,000 dads working in large companies, they said that where I had a workplace culture that was supportive, where I had a boss and colleagues that were supportive of my work-family issues, the likelihood of them being satisfied in their present job was much higher. The likelihood of them feeling like they had good work-life balance was much greater, and the likelihood of them staying with that organization over the long term was also much higher. So I think these benefits, some of which cost money and many of which don't, and some of the most valuable ones don't, really pay for themselves in terms of being a company that people want to work for and an organization people want to stay with.
You know, if I could add one thing about productivity, the science on chronic overwork is very, very clear. If people are working extremely long hours under very high pressure or are also facing work and family pressures, they burn out. And most people only have 6 or 7 good hours of work in them in a given day. Occasional overwork is a cost of doing business. I think everyone understands that. But if it's chronic overwork and people don't get time off or time to unplug or a paternity leave or enough vacation time, it will crater people's performance over time.
Very valid. Okay, so we know that actually a lot of women signed up for this webinar today. And assuming that they are trying to get their partner to be more involved around the house, telling our partners, our dads, that they're working too much isn't getting us anywhere. How can moms, and I guess I'll ask Scott first, and how can moms empower our husbands to be a more modern dad?
Well, I think actually I stumbled onto this in my personal life. My wife has a weird, very demanding career. So before we had our kid, we had to sit down and really hash out how is it going to work for her to resume her career, what would she need from me, etc. So we really had a very specific ongoing conversation for a while before we became parents. And that's probably too late for a lot of people now, but if you could talk about it beforehand, that's ideal. But talking through your priorities, so what is your work priority, what is your family priority, and both spouses being able to talk about this and how can we work together to get on the same page, I think that's the most important step, is really talking through your priorities together and making it a safe conversation, because, you know, not to get stereotypical, some guys are not so comfortable talking about these things. You have to make it a comfortable conversation. Also, we have to give dads space to take on responsibility and not hover over them or make them do it the same way that you might do it. And insist on them doing things. I know a common complaint many wives and spouses have is that, after my husband doesn't put the dishes away for 2 hours, I sit there and get angry about it, and then I put the dishes away. No, the dishes have to sit there. And the same thing with childcare. It's have the dad always be the bed and bath time guy. Have the dad always have certain hours where they are they're the parent. Leave the house. Because dads can be just as good parents as moms. They just need the time on task, which they sometimes don't get because of workplace demands or other things. So if you can help your husband with that, that would really help as well. And make sure your dads, the dads in your life have time for themselves and also time to be together with other dads. Make sure that they have enough time for exercise and for social activities, because if you're a busy working parent and you're at work and then everything at home is focused on the family, you can sometimes lose yourself or you could burn out. So it's important that we all pace ourselves and we support each other in that. It's funny, I wrote my book specifically for working dads, but the more I look at the book, the more I feel like wives of these working dads should really read the book and then help the dads put a lot of this into place.
Yeah, everyone needs
one little thing that I would add is it's worthwhile to make sure for any moms out there that they know what the paternity policy is for their husband. You may be making assumptions about what it is. He may not really know. He may not have asked. And I think if you know what it is, then you can have that honest discussion about, okay, you're given 2 weeks if that's what it is. Let's make sure you take it, or 6 weeks. Let's talk about taking that.
I would just say, listen, it is not mom's responsibility to get dad to show up. One, just know that he's already he desires to show up. He might not know and have the tools to. Point him to Scott's book. Point him to Brad. Point him to Fatherly. Point to the kinds of things that are happening, at Chartbeat. But don't make it your responsibility to own his involvement. Just point him in the direction and let him find his own way.
That's great, because we talk about priorities, and we're talking about chronic overwork, right? That dads are facing, and then if they're not feeling that they're present when they want to be present, and that they're so exhausted from life and the stress and what they want to be and who they want to be, but they're not that person. Is this dad guilt? Is this, mom guilt is kind of my definition is, feeling guilty for not being with your children at all times, and then feeling guilty for not being as involved or as present as you wish you could be when you are with your children. What's the definition of dad guilt? Simon, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I think guilt is like a part of parenthood. It is like that guilt equals parent. So I think one, that's going to exist, and if dads feel guilty, then at least we know we're doing something right at some level. I think what we're seeing, the challenge. Dads should feel guilty about being not being as involved, and Brad talked a little bit about that. The other piece that we're seeing is dads also, or parents in general now, feeling guilty, both dad and mom, about their career, because as Brad noted, success in career is a really important part. The question happens is, how do you help them, live their guilty lives efficiently and effectively as employers? As Scott noted, burnout's a really big issue. How do you ensure that there's not this sort of third or fourth shift after you put the kids down? Then they have to work from 10 at night to 1 in the morning every single day. And I think that's about how do we set up roles and expectations with managers, within the company, within the culture that we're building. I think guilt is always going to exist. It's like, how do we help create cultures that enable people to functionally manage guilt effectively?
I think that's interesting, and I would love to do a roundup of, we know we've talked about paternity leave. HR people are listening right now. What can, and maybe we'll go around and we'll start with Brad and then Scott, then Nathan, then Simon. What can HR people do to implement a great workforce? And just add one thing. I know Care.com is a benefit that we give to all parents to help with backup care, child care, and to know that they have it, that's important. I would say that. What would you say, Brad, that HR could do to enforce a great workplace for dads?
We've talked about leave policies. We've talked about flexibility. The other thing I would just say is start the conversation in your workplace. I visited a lot of employers, MetLife, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Cardinal Health, so forth, and just had panels of dads come and talk about their experiences and share it with other fathers. And I find that conversation is really important. So just get the conversation started, and don't think about parenting group as a women's group. Think about bringing dads into the conversation. That's all.
That's great. Scott, what would you add?
I would say it's not a benefit thing at all. It's performance evaluation. If there's one thing I could change, it's performance evaluation. Companies are bad at evaluating employees' performance. They look at things like time at the office, or time at task, or time in their chairs. And in a workplace where people can work flexibly with technology readily available to do so, and the fact that, frankly, most jobs can be done 30% to 40% done remotely better than it could be done in a busy workplace, the fact that we're still kind of in the dark ages when it comes to performance evaluation is really holding things back. When managers can trust that, hey, I'm measuring my team's performance so I can let go of where, when, and how, then progress is going to happen. There have been companies that have made great strides in this. I suspect Nathan's company is pretty good about measuring performance. But some companies who have shifted from really being one of these high, we have to spend 60, 70 hours a week in the workplace kind of work cultures, shifted to more of a results-only type of work environment. They put metrics in place. And now they live by these metrics, and they found that the people who were working 70-hour weeks and getting great performance evaluations before were only mediocre performers once they kind of redid their performance evaluations. And some of the people who were only working 40, 45 hours a week were their best performers because obviously time on task is easily gamed. So the best thing HR people can do is have a good performance evaluation system in place.
Great. Nathan?
Yeah, I would just say that a lot of companies put a lot of focus on culture and talk about their culture with the company and what they can do to help build their culture. It's just important that culture isn't just about parents. Obviously, it's about everything about working in that environment, and including parenting and dads in particular about how to incorporate that into that culture. Not just around flexible hours, but understanding culture as a whole and what sort of things parents can bring into that community and participate in that culture and make it part of how you're defining yourself as a company.
Simon, thank you.
Sure. Finally, I would say find people who you can highlight within the company, preferably in leadership. So at Facebook, Tom Stocky, one of the leading product and engineer guys, took a famous 4-month paternity leave and wrote about it. Find people within your company, celebrate the CEO or VP of engineering or whoever it is who's doing something cool around whether it's paternity leave or him as a father. At Fatherly, one of the things that we do every week, we're coming out with some cool hip guy and talking to him about his life, and he also happens to be a dad, whether it's like the #1 EDM DJ or Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, or some leading athlete. And doing that helps people change their perspective and see these are people that I aspire to be, and they're also engaged fathers, and I can sort of replicate that. So find those people within or outside of your company that you can point to.
That's all great advice. Thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who's listening, whether you're a mom, dad, partner, HR person, or just a great avid listener. Good luck to everyone, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.